Pew Research puts the last year of Generation X at exactly 1980. If you were born between 1975 and 1980, you spent your entire life standing right on top of that number. Your childhood ran on cassette tapes and empty houses after school, and your adulthood arrived through a dial-up modem right as you were forming your identity. Nobody ever gave that exact overlap a name, until researchers and dictionary editors quietly did. This video lays out exactly what that timing built in you, and what it's still costing you right now. That's not a small technicality. Pew Research is the most cited authority on generational boundaries in the country, and their definition draws Generation X across 16 years, from 1965 to 1980. Every year in that window matters, but the last 5, 1975 through 1980, sit right against the wall. One birth year later, and you would have been sorted into the millennial generation instead, with a completely different set of assumptions stapled to your name. Generation X already carries a nickname most people forget, the forgotten generation. It's the smallest living generation in the country, somewhere around 65 million people, wedged between two much larger ones. The baby boomers ahead of you stayed in the workforce and in the spotlight far longer than any generation before them. The millennials behind you became the biggest, most talked about working age group in modern marketing and media. Gen X sat in the middle and got skipped by both directions at once. And Pew Research itself describes Gen X as a small and sometimes overlooked group. Now stack your specific birth years on top of that. In 2020, editors at the Oxford Dictionary of English quietly added a word to describe people born on that exact seam between Generation X and the millennials. And in 2021, the Oxford English Dictionary followed. They gave your slice of the timeline an actual name, Xennial, a blend of the two labels that never fully fit you. That word exists in print right now because researchers kept noticing the same pattern in people born through the middle-late 1970s and into the early 1980s. That's a group that grew up analog and came of age digital, on a schedule nobody else shares. So before we get into what that timing actually built inside you, sit with this for a second. You didn't imagine the feeling of not fully belonging anywhere. Dictionary editors, demographers, and generational researchers all independently landed on the same conclusion you've been carrying quietly for years, that you're standing in a category of your own. More than 90 of the people watching this video right now are not subscribed. If you've spent your whole life feeling overlooked by every group you were supposed to belong to, don't let this channel overlook you too. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell. Share this with one person who needs to hear this. Now let's continue. That overlap started building long before anyone had a word for it, back in your own childhood. Through the 1970s and into the 1980s, more mothers were entering the workforce than at any point before, and divorce rates were climbing at the same time. By 1982, about 22% of the country's kids were living in single-parent households. That's nearly 1 in 4. Both of those shifts landed on the same generation of kids at once, and you were right in the middle of it. That combination built what researchers now call the latchkey childhood, and by the mid-1990s, Census Bureau data put latchkey kids at around 18% of the entire grade school population. That's roughly 1 out of every 6 kids. You know the version of that statistic that never made it into any report, the specific sound of your own key in your own front door, the empty kitchen, the television turned on for company more than entertainment. You know the quiet skill of managing an afternoon completely alone, learned before you were old enough to legally be left alone anywhere else. Nobody sat you down and taught you that skill. You built it out of necessity, hour by hour, because the adults in your life were working, or splitting a household in two, or both at once. Millions of kids the same age absorbed the same lesson at the same time, that you're the one who has to handle things, because there is often nobody else in the room to do it. That was survival, not neglect. Now here is the second layer of it. That empty house sat right next to a very different message coming from everywhere else. The 1980s were also the decade of the missing children milk cartons and the school fingerprinting programs. An officer rolled each of your fingers onto an ink pad while explaining, gently, that this card would help police identify you if something happened. So you grew up being told the world outside your door was more dangerous than it had ever been. The door still closed behind you every single afternoon. You were still the one who let yourself in. Compare that to what came after you. By the time millennials born in the 1990s and Gen Z were raising their own kids, unsupervised time had dropped sharply, and after-school programs and closer supervision became the norm instead of the exception. That drop matters more than it sounds. It means the specific childhood that built you was already closing behind the generations right after you, which is exactly why almost nobody younger than you can fully picture what that afternoon alone actually felt like. That lesson didn't stay in childhood. It became a default setting, and self-reliance stopped being something you practiced and became something you simply were, so automatically that most of you never stopped to ask where it came from. And right as that setting locked into place, something else showed up that no generation before you had ever had to deal with at that exact age. Before the internet ever touched your life, your whole world ran on physical media. Cassette tapes you rewound with a pencil, a Walkman clipped to your waistband, VHS tapes worn soft from replay, and arcade machines that ate your quarters one at a time. That wasn't a phase of childhood you grew out of early. That was the operating system of your entire childhood, all the way through your early teenage years. You were leaving your teenage years then, stepping into who you were actually going to become. The ground moved. Dial-up internet arrived, with that specific screeching sound piping through a phone line, and the landline was still how you reached your friends, before anyone owned a cell phone. That timing landed at the exact stretch of life when most people are still figuring out who they're becoming, their late teens and early 20s. It meant this generation watched the entire way people communicate, work, and connect get rebuilt in real time, right in the middle of that process. Older Gen X, born in the mid-1960s, built their identity and started their careers before the internet existed in any everyday form. That timing gave them a running start. Millennials, born in the early 1980s onward, had computers and internet access present for at least part of childhood, so the shift was already underway before their sense of self had fully set. You're the only slice of the timeline that had to do the identity work and the technological rebuild at the exact same moment, live, with no model to copy. Watch how fast it moved once it started. You went from a landline and a dial-up connection to an early iPod holding your entire music collection, then to renting movies on DVD instead of driving to a video store. All of that happened inside the handful of years most people spend finishing school and starting their first real job. Nobody handed you a manual for any of it. You just kept adjusting, one new format at a time, while also trying to figure out who you were underneath all of it. That's exactly why researchers describe this cohort as a kind of translator, someone fluent in both a slower offline world and a fully connected one. That fluency isn't an accident. It comes from the same place your childhood self-reliance came from. It blends with something else, too, an openness to change and new tools that older Gen X never had to develop at the same pace. You ended up holding both traits at once, Gen X's skepticism and self-sufficiency, and the adaptability everyone assumes only younger generations have. That exact blend, the self-reliance built in an empty house and the adaptability built at a dial-up modem, is the specific toolkit being pulled out of you right now. It's happening in real time, in the exact stage of life you're living through. Right now, you're somewhere between 45 and 51 years old. That places you directly inside what researchers call the sandwich generation, adults caring for a child and an aging parent during the exact same years. Almost half of all adults between 40 and 59 currently carry both roles at once. Women carry most of that weight. About 60% of sandwich generation caregivers are women, and on an average day, women in that role spend 45 more minutes on caregiving tasks than men in the identical position. The numbers behind that gap aren't small. Clio's 2026 Family Health Index report found that 64% of working women in the sandwich generation describe themselves as being at a breaking point. They cite rising mental health strain, higher healthcare costs, and real damage to their careers. 72% report high caregiving stress while still working full-time. On average, sandwich generation caregivers spend 24 hours a week managing care on top of their paid job. That number climbs to 27 hours a week for mothers specifically, nearly a second full-time job stacked on top of the first one. The physical cost shows up too. 58% of sandwich generation caregivers report their own health as only fair or poor, and nearly a third are managing 2 or more chronic health conditions of their own, while still managing everyone else's. On top of the time and the health toll, there is a financial one. Average out-of-pocket costs for home care run around $10,500 a year, paid quietly out of a budget that was already stretched before either parent needed it. Here's the thing that gets lost when people talk about this. Part of why it hits your specific age group so hard comes down to timing again. Many women in this generation built their careers and delayed having children compared to the generations before them. That means the child-raising years and the aging parent years, two stages that used to happen one after the other, are now landing on top of each other instead. None of that's a coincidence, and none of it's a personal failure either. Think about what built you before any of this started. An empty house that taught you to handle things alone. A hinge point in your early 20s that taught you to adapt to a moving target without complaint. Both of those traits made you exceptional at exactly the kind of load-bearing work caregiving requires. And both are precisely why you keep absorbing more of it without asking anyone to notice. You're not imagining the exhaustion. You're standing inside a measured, named, current crisis point. And the traits that built it in you were installed decades before anyone in your household needed you this much. Now put all of it together. The childhood that built your self-reliance before you had a name for it. The hinge point that built your adaptability while nobody was watching. And the caregiving years currently pulling on both of those traits at once. None of that adds up to a woman who fell through the cracks between two generations. It adds up to a specific, documented, named cohort that researchers can point to directly. Dictionary editors didn't add the word Xennial because it sounded clever. They added it because the same pattern kept showing up year after year in people born on that exact seam. That's an analog childhood colliding with a digital adulthood, arriving at the precise moment identity was still being formed. Pew Research didn't draw the Gen X line at 1980 by accident either. Somewhere inside that boundary sits an entire cohort of women who are, at once, fully Gen X by the calendar and something distinct from the rest of that generation by lived experience. That's the actual answer to the question you've probably carried for years, whether silently or out loud, about why you never quite matched either label handed to you. You're not an edge case, and you're not a person who failed to pick a side. You're part of a specific, named, evidenced generation of women who happen to be the very last of one era and the very first to carry pieces of the next one forward, all at the same time. Researchers use a specific word for people in your position: translator. It describes someone who can sit comfortably in a conversation with a baby boomer parent and a Gen Z coworker in the same afternoon and genuinely understand both of them. That skill didn't come from nowhere. It came from an empty house, a dial-up modem, and a decade of being told you belong to whichever generation was easiest for everyone else to file you under. That's not a small thing to finally have a name for. If you made it all the way here, you're already in a smaller group than you think, because most people click away before the real answer ever shows up. That name you never had for yourself, you have it now. If that gave you some of the recognition you came here looking for, leave a comment and tell me which part hit closest to home. Then like and subscribe so more of this actually reaches you. The next video goes even deeper into why this generation runs on self-reliance instead of asking for help, and I think you're going to want to watch that one next.